Good morning, Carol.
Good morning.
How are you?
Okay.
Good.
What are you doing? Okay.
Morning, Gary.
Good morning. Morning, Carol.
Hi, how's things going? How's Alice's knee doing?
Well, we went on a walk in a wildlife refuge for about a mile, and she went without her cane yesterday. So
Wow.
improving definitely.
Okay.
Fantastic.
She
Tell her
got
hello.
Morning, Ricky.
Good
she got
morning.
cleared
Morning.
she got cleared for bicycling if she decides to do it.
Oh, wow. Terrific.
This too will come to pass.
Hi, Shell.
Hi. Computer is doing a Zoom update.
Yeah, mine did as well. I'm thinking, oh, he's going to be wanting to get on. They're wondering, where is he? Actually, I normally expect that when I'm on a Zoom call with your wife,
Oh, really?
because she uses Rutgers
Yeah.
and they, everything has to be up to date. So every time practically everyone on the Zoom calls, all right, we have to update. Yeah. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Just a couple more minutes.
So Carol, how are things doing in our building?
Things are quiet.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they've canceled a lot of stuff, which is fine by me.
Here too, we had a show last night that got rained out.
Oh,
Nice, Dan.
It wasn't raining.
Hi.
Here comes Maddie. Morning, Maddie. There you are.
You're
Okay,
you're muted, Maddie.
you're muted, Maddie. Yeah, I'm surprised I have not seen yet the
Am I
t-shirt.
ever gonna figure this stuff out?
Probably not.
Just click under the pictures.
I did it. I know how to do it. I'm so stupid.
Let's face it, when they used to produce, instructional manuals that came with computers and stuff, you mastered it approximately 1 to 2 months after they came out with the new model or the new program. And today, everything's constantly being updated, so you never know. Like they always come out with something new or whatever. But we'll get started because we're all here. So again, I'm glad everyone's doing well. And, I chose for our topic something that really was much more in the news in December. It hasn't been quite so prominent, but and there are a lot of other issues. There are a lot of other things going on, whether we're talking about Israel or we're talking about the Jewish world. Sadly, anti-Semitism, like every month, could be the topic. So we're talking about what's happening at the Kotel. A situation that is, to use, to paraphrase someone's earlier joke, a situation that's just a little off the wall. They, way back in 2016, the Israeli government helped put together an agreement that would really the Western Wall compromise that would allow not just Orthodox Jews to worship at the wall, and indeed the plaza, the main area of the Kotel, would remain, under Orthodox auspices. However, it's a big wall, and just beyond the bridge that leads up to the Temple Mount, there's another section which is an archaeological park and has been source of a lot of excavations, important work. Since about 2000, we've been using that for the conservative movement for our egalitarian services. And in fact, for a long time, we would jokingly call it a Kotel HaMasorti. Instead of a Kotel HaMa'aravi, the Western Wall, a Kotel HaMasorti. And then in 2016, the government put together, really under the leadership of Natan Sharansky, a compromise whereby the government would continue to expand the prayer space on that side of the bridge, on that side of the Kotel, and create much more of a formal prayer service, accessibility, etc. And that's where we could have egalitarian services. And that would be jointly administered by the Israeli government and by representatives of reform and conservative movements. And that seemed to be an acceptable compromise to everyone. And then the Netanyahu government backed out of it due to pressure from the Haredim and the ultra-Orthodox parties that were part of their coalition. And then with a new government, there was a push to try and get it passed. The reality is the current government, which is still an amazing phenomenon, had certainly people really on both sides, both left wing and right wing, that supported this compromise. And in fact, most everybody said, yeah, we're going to now put this on the docket. We're going to now push this forward. And then suddenly in December, end of November, there are rumblings that no, they're not going to. And now it has been indefinitely shelved again. And needless to say, the Masorti and the reform movements and many, many other people are quite upset and also quite shocked. Whereas the Netanyahu government, I would say with all due respect to Netanyahu, but Netanyahu is who he is, and truth is not exactly a major concept in his world, that he would back away from it, okay. But it was very, very shocking that the current government would back away from it. So I want to hear some of your reactions. What have you been hearing? What did you think of some of the things that you read, et cetera, et cetera? Any questions about any things they talked about in the articles? Or?
I'm trying to understand, Rabbi. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. When we were there, you and I and the rest of Federation and a few other members from White Meadow Temple in 2018, I went with Nancy and we walked right before the bridge down to this excavation area.
Yeah.
And there were even benches to sit at. And is that the area right there, or
Yeah.
is it around the corner facing the another area?
Yeah. Well, if you're facing the Kotel, if you're
Right,
standing back from the Kotel and you see the main plaza,
right.
and the main plaza, you've got the men's section and the women's section,
yeah.
and the whole area behind it. And then just to the right, as you're facing the Kotel, there is a bridge,
Right,
Rabbi Bridge, I think they call it, that goes up to the Temple Mount.
right,
And then there's another entrance on the other side, on the right-hand side of that walkway, and that's the area. There's
Right,
a
and you had to go down, you had to walk down and, right, okay, yeah, all right.
yeah, you're in the right place.
All right, so I was in the right place. I'm just trying to,
Yeah, mhm,
because years ago, back in the 70s, that was not there.
right.
And I remember going to, both areas, and literally walking down to that section that you were describing. But now it's built up with ramps and you could
Mhm.
literally walk there. So now they're refusing even to pray in that area?
Well, it's not so much they're refusing people praying in that area. It's that the government was going to help build it up, and they are actually already started.
Okay,
And it was Naftali Bennett who,
Right.
was supervising it. They actually started building up the area. As we'll see, there really are a lot of issues that are coming to the fore. I'll just mention one. It is an archaeological site.
Right.
And the archaeologists, I think, are rightfully concerned about how things are going to be built up and what's going to be built there and how that may affect the site itself. So, that is a concern. You don't have to be Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox or Reform or conservative to realize that this is an important issue. Also, it should be said, by the way, that the archaeological park there that was carries the name of William Davidson. William Davidson, former owner of not the 76ers, I forget which team. No, Detroit. What's Detroit's basketball team?
Pistons.
The Pistons, yeah. So the former owner of the Pistons, former owner because he died. He was one of it was partially his money that created that entire park and that entire museum. And if you look at the list of donors, you will see a lot of very prominent people from Detroit on that list, who belong, and Davidson belonged to Shaarei Tzedek, the conservative synagogue in Detroit, and many of the other people were members at Shaarei Tzedek and other congregations. So, it's something that we keep in our mind, and the fact that some of the money building this up has come already from the Masorti and Reform movements, if you will. And it's not so much they're not going to. Sorry, I got off track there. It's not so much they're not going to allow people praying there. It's that they are not going to allow any supervision on that site to other movements, and there will not be government support for building up the prayer area, making it accessible.
It's hard to get there. There's no ramps for the handicapped.
Exactly.
And another thing that's come into the fore of late has been violence, but attacks by Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox. We shall see what happens this weekend with Tisha B'Av. Excuse me, Tu B'Shvat.
Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat is not a big day for
Right.
the Kotel. But thank you for raising that, because that brings us to what has sparked this particular round of controversy. One, on Tisha B'Av, and this is why you may have been thinking of Tisha B'Av, there were Reform and Masorti Jews that were gathering for Tisha B'Av services. But they were disrupted, and this is not in the main plaza of the Kotel. This is on the other side, and they were disrupted on Tisha B'Av, no less, in their prayers and in their reading of Eicha by, as you said, ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, and other Orthodox individuals. That was violent. And there has been violence. It has kind of ticked up. Every Rosh Chodesh, the Neshota Kotel, the women of the wall, who have been around for a long time, and they have been pushing for allowing women to participate at the Kotel. And these are women, and now they've kind of split into two groups, because the women of the wall, they come, they want to read from the Torah, they want to wear their talit and tefillin, and that was not allowed at the Kotel, even on the women's side, by a women's minyan. And so they are prevented from bringing a Torah to the site. They are frequently attacked. And it's become much more violent. And, in addition to the frustration of people who want to daven there and, want to conduct services in their fashion, according to their minhag, it could be dangerous. And you have to realize that there's a lot of shouting and screaming. There are a lot of, horrible language. There's spitting, throwing of eggs. It's really, really unpleasant.
It's juvenile too. Throwing
Yes.
eggs and stuff like that. It's very juvenile, but it's
Well,
annoying.
it's being done by juveniles.
Yes.
Because what they do is they stir up a lot of the yeshiva students that are there, or they bring in all these people to protest. Even to say that, the Orthodox are involved, we're not talking about your average Orthodox Jew in Israel. They certainly oppose the violence, and many of them are, quite comfortable. Okay, so the Reformed Conservative, they're over in their part of the wall. That's fine. They don't care.
They didn't
We are
want
talking.
the synagogue to do it, that's fine.
Yeah,
But some Orthodox consider the entire wall a synagogue.
exactly. Well, that's it. The Orthodox, since 1967, the Kotel has been under the auspices of a special group, and that is an Orthodox group, and they have insisted upon, what goes on there is Orthodox. And again, it's not just Orthodox, but their particular approach to Orthodoxy. So therefore, women at the wall, who are women who want to do a women's service on the women's side, but some of them happen to wear talit and tefillin. They're opposed to that. They're opposed to women davening, reading from the Torah. They don't want a microphone to be used on the women's side. God forbid somebody should hear it. And now, of course, the violence is spreading to the other side. So, and the people behind it, again, are the Haredim, and including some of the religious parties in Israel. One, I don't know if I can find the specific quote, but Aryeh Deri, who was from one of the, I think he's from Shas, if I remember correctly, he would, he would encourage people to come and disrupt the services, a member of Knesset, although at this point, I think he's going back to jail for corruption. He's already done a stint in jail, and now he's, I think, going back. He's just convicted of something else again. But he's been pushing it, the Haredim, and now it's also being pushed by the Likud and Netanyahu, because they're trying to turn this as a major issue against the current government, because the current government has supported this compromise. Now, of course, it was Netanyahu himself who approved the compromise back in 2016.
In the first place.
So actually, there are a number of issues that come to the fore. First of all, the political power of the ultra-Orthodox, which has been an ongoing issue in Israel. How much control should they have? And of course, they also are kind of circling the wagons because the ultra-Orthodox parties are not in the government currently. I mean, they're in the opposition. And, there have been a number of attempts to change certain things, both kashrut supervision, conversion. This government has really, to its credit, has really been trying to deal with a number of the issues that face the country. And they're willing to make some changes because the problem of the Haredim is not just a problem for conservative and Reform Jews, it's a problem as well for Orthodox Jews. So that has been one of the issues. Another issue? Oh yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Oh, no, just a question on the Masorti side. Who would lead the services? You might want to have Nusach Ashkenazi or Nusach Sfaradi, or different, somebody doing a triennial and others do something. Would there be one leader for one service, let's say on Shabbos, or is there enough room to spread out for different services?
It is both. There is some room to spread out, or potentially there is some room.
When Alice and I went, there were two services going on at the same time in opposite ends of the area.
Opposite ends.
Okay. And also, people make arrangements to have the service. So, when we've gone, like during the week, when I was there at the Rabbinical Assembly, well, it was a egalitarian Ashkenazi minyan because it was the Rabbinical Assembly. I'm sure that if there were a Sephardi group that is Masorti or Reform, that they would do, their nusach. It's not an attempt to say this is how services are done here. But it's much more that there could be egalitarian services, and that women who want to wear talit and tefillin, or if women are leading services, reading from the Torah, that all that is permitted, which would not be permitted in the main plaza. So actually, as I mentioned, there's been a bit of a split in the Neshota Kotel, in the women of the wall, in that there are many women who are quite comfortable with the idea that we have this prayer space on, by Robinson's Arch is what the area is called, the archaeological park. That's fine. But there are some of the original members of Women in the Wall who are still angry because they want to be able to do it at the wall in the main plaza, not on the men's side, but they want to do it on the women's side, because many of them come from an Orthodox background. They have no problems with the with separate sections. They're not objecting to the mechitza. Their objection is that women, Orthodox women, should be able to read from the Torah, be able to conduct their own services within their own minyan. So, you do have a number of different people. The Women of the Wall, of course, are women from Israel who've been living there for years and years and years and have been pushing for these rights. You have the Reform movement, the conservative movement, the Reconstructionist movement. Generally, the Reform and all these movements are on the same page. Not always. And of course, for Israel, they often just lump everyone together. It's all the Reforming. No, that's not necessarily the case. So you have the issue of the Orthodox control, I should say Haredi control almost. Then you have the issue of what do people want in terms of the services. And then it is also very much an issue between Israel and diaspora. Because some of the people who want this the most are in fact conservative and Reform Jews, mostly from North America. For many Israelis, it's not that big a deal. They're not, most Israelis are secular. And the reality is that the vast majority of people that go to the Kotel on a regular basis or a daily basis are in fact Orthodox. However, if the Kotel is the holiest site for the entire Jewish people, and if Israel is to be the state for the Jewish people, how is that reflected in what goes on in Israel? What kind of voice does diaspora Jewry have? Can the majority of Jews from the diaspora, because the majority of Jews in the diaspora are in fact conservative and Reformed Jews or, liberal Jews, can they be accepted within the Jewish state? And one of the things that Netanyahu was very good at was really distancing the diaspora. He really did not have a lot of respect for the diaspora. There were a lot of actions that he took. Some of it was probably out of anger and pique because of the many liberal and then sadly anti-Zionist Jews outside of Israel. And the fact that the diaspora community was not a big fan of Netanyahu. I'm sure there was also a great deal of frustration that you had so many diaspora Jews with an ultra-left perspective, and they were gaining a greater voice. And the reality is that the largest Jewish community in the world had shifted to Israel. It was no longer North America. So you've got the internal Israeli politics, the religious politics of Israel, and the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. And one of the hallmarks of this current government is they have been trying to improve relationships with the diaspora. And it really seemed as if this compromise would be put into practice, and then suddenly it's frozen.
What's the reason for that?
The reason I will let me get the latest comment, if I can find it among all my articles. Well, I can't find it, but basically they said they're not touching it because it's just become too controversial. As I mentioned before, it has also become a wedge issue for the Likud in trying to weaken the current government and create problems. And the government has enough problems on its own. The very existence of this government. And they just want to step away from something that really is, that has become such a major cause and is being pushed and pushed and pushed by the Likud and by Netanyahu. And the government really is trying to avoid or minimize some of its opposition, because it's accomplishing so much for Israel. But again, the two things that really still upset us is, again, not just the fact that once again the Israeli government has reneged on a deal, but there's increasing violence, as Gary mentioned, increasing violence at the Kotel.
I think that's more of it than anything else, is the violence, is that people can't come and do their business in peace.
Right. So those who are in favor of the compromise are frustrated because, this is not good. This violence could lead to, some very serious events. But they're trying to avoid the violence, and they're really, again, it's Israeli politics as opposed to how they feel about the diaspora. And, are they ever going to give any recognition to non-Orthodox streams of Jewry? The reality is, as a rabbi, as a conservative rabbi, I could do weddings pretty much around the world. I cannot officiate as at a wedding in Israel. I mean, at least I can't officiate at a wedding that will be recognized by the state of Israel. I've actually done a wedding in Israel. But they were Canadians who were married by a judge in Canada. And then I did the religious ceremony in Israel. But, so, and, we think of the opposition. There is now a Reform rabbi who is part of the Knesset. He was voted in with one of the parties, and the vitriol and the reactions of the ultra-Orthodox parties, or they has been pretty severe. And by the way, the Minister for Religious Affairs has received additional security because of the concerns about threats to his life over the changes that he is making, that the government is making in terms of religious perspectives. They're working on kashrut, they're working on conversion, and the Rabbinate and the Charedim are not happy about that. So, it is part of a larger issue of, what is the Jewish character of the Jewish state?
I mean, just to digress for 2 minutes, I saw it in my family when my daughter Avra got married. At the wedding, we had Rabbi Lipson doing the performance, doing the ceremony, and I didn't realize until after the whole event occurred that my daughter came up to me and said, "Dad, you wouldn't believe it, but Tully, my son-in-law, his grandfather, who lives in Israel, who was at the wedding, did not approve of Rabbi Lipson, who was conservative, doing the wedding. Luckily, one of my cousins was at the wedding, my cousin Rabbi Richard Kirsch, and he is Orthodox, and he did the ceremony off to the side that no one even knew. He just, did it and had a couple of witnesses, and it was done. So he was satisfied, but it was.
Yeah.
Well, when my cousin Susie got married, first wedding I performed after my graduation, the wedding was in her backyard in Kingston, Pennsylvania. I did the wedding, but the ketubah, her husband at the time was, he also passed away, but he's Israeli, and he insisted that an Orthodox rabbi sign the ketubah and, be the witnesses, so they can look at the wedding ring.
Yeah.
And
Similar,
He wanted to make sure everybody would accept it.
yeah.
right.
Which is,
Yeah.
unfortunate.
And I forgot to mention my son-in-law's grandfather and his wife were both Israeli too. So that complicated the.
Yeah.
Well, I had a similar thing I don't know, like 4 or
Excuse
5
me
years
one moment. Yeah, go ahead.
Jessica
Sorry.
just questioned me as to who was the rabbi who married Stephen and me. And, it never dawned on me. He was a rabbi from Riverdale, because Rabbi Whiteman wasn't available then, who I wonder if, I consider Rabbi Whiteman Orthodox, basically.
Everybody else did too.
But
I think Rabbi Whiteman did too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
of course, he was from a different era. That
guy, and he's dead now.
Yes.
And I can't be positive if he was Orthodox or not. So
The fellow,
the rabbi who married me.
He lived
I think
in
it
Century
depends
Village
what
with New York.
rabbinical school he went to, more than his own personal observance, maybe.
I think he
Yeah.
got his CIFA from YU. So
He
it was
lived, he lived here in Century Village in Florida for his last few years, along with Pearl, and he attended the Orthodox synagogue here.
Yeah, but Rabbi Whiteman graduated Yeshiva University. So-
Yeah, so he definitely was
Yeah.
an Orthodox rabbi. And, of course, that was in the day where, there was a greater similarity between, say, Orthodoxy and Reform and conservative, in the sense that, right-wing conservative and left-wing Orthodoxy, I mean, they're still quite close. It's not necessarily such a different thing, but it's now it's much more political.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I co-officiated at a bat mitzvah in Israel. One class of the day school from Kansas City had a bat mitzvah together in Israel. I mean, all their parents were doctors. They were able to afford this, and but they had their own ceremony. I mean, these were day school kids, so they did all the Torah reading and the Haftarah and the davening. It was really quite wonderful. And the one who really was conducting the service was the rabbi who he had recently just taken a new position in Philadelphia, but he was the head of the school in Kansas City. And when we did this, we did it in a hotel. We weren't doing it at the Kotel. We weren't doing it any public. Well, it was a public space because it was a large room in the hotel. And we had to do it with the door closed. So God forbid the kashrut supervisor would see what's going on, that there are girls wearing talit and leading a service.
There are girls learning anything.
Yeah. So it's, that is the backdrop. And that is a problem, again, not just for diaspora Jews, but, even Jews in the land of Israel, as they talk, I mean, the issues that have surrounded conversion in Israel are just, huge.
Phenomenal, yes.
Because even, they were talking about retroactively canceling conversions, which doesn't really exist in Judaism. But they were talking about conversions that were done by an Orthodox rabbi that was appointed by the government. Just because something is, has been the practice, doesn't mean it necessarily has a strong foundation in Jewish tradition. So the whole notion, for example, of you shouldn't hear a woman's voice because kol isha erva, the woman's voice is potentially sexually exciting. That appears only one time in the Talmud. And it is part of this whole long list of talking about things that could be sexually enticing. Her voice, her leg, her shoulder, it's not necessarily a halachic statement. So, that whole notion, it's kind of hard to argue that. And there are any number of other things that go on in Israel that is decided by the Rabbinate. And not that I'm trying to disqualify the Rabbinate, but they represent one particular group perspective on Jewish law, and not necessarily the dominant perception or understanding. And they pick and choose as well. So
it's very easy, do it my way.
Right. And and when I was in Canada, that was pretty much the attitude in Ottawa. We'll do it the Orthodox way and then everyone will be happy. And that was kind of fine 40 years ago. And when you had Orthodox rabbis who were modern Orthodox rabbis, even if you put them more centrist in the movement, they were Orthodox rabbis. They were comfortable with who they were. And they were, they did what they did. And they understood the Reform and Conservative did what they did, and they don't have to do it. So, but let them do what they want. But, that changed, first of all, as we became egalitarian through, virtually all of the conservative movement. That created much more of an issue. And it's harder to just do things one way and everyone's going to be happy. So, for example, at Brandeis, there was a great compromise to try and bring the community together on Friday night. We had traditional services. They were led by a man, and we were girls and boys. We sat separately. There was no physical mechitza, and it was basically a Ramah service, and it was very well attended, and everybody liked it. But then, I doubt very much it exists today, and even in the Orthodox community at Brandeis, the mechitza started getting higher. They were more particular. They wouldn't allow this or that. There was a big change. When I came to Brandeis, Nancy and Shell's cousin, Rabbi Rod Glogauer, was the Orthodox advisor. And he's from and very, very knowledgeable. He was doing his PhD at Brandeis, but he was, got his smicha in Israel. He knew his stuff. But because he knew his stuff, he knew what he could permit and what he couldn't permit. I have to say that he did marry the daughter of a conservative rabbi. So, there was a certain liberal side to him. And he even let her do a Devar Torah. It was at the end of services, but and he himself would take the Torah over to the women's side on Simchat Torah so they could dance with it. He knew what was permitted. But then there was pressure from the student body as new Orthodox advisors came. And so and that's been an ongoing issue in Israel.
We went to, after the tour, we stayed on in Israel for another week. And a friend of mine had a son who was getting married in Israel. We were invited. 2 Jewish kids from New Jersey. His father is modern Orthodox, so he is. I don't know the girl's background, but definitely an Orthodox ceremony. We come in for the reception, and there's a mechitza on wheels. After about 3 minutes, the first dance, the mechitza is rolled away. And it's gone for the rest of the day. So it was there symbolically.
Yeah.
Nobody left when it was rolled away.
We don't always think about what some of the negative connotations of the rabbinate are. So, for example, I have some friends, Israelis, who got married by a judge in the United States because they didn't want to have to deal with the rabbinate in Israel. Because if you get married, first of all, you're married by the local rabbi, the rabbi of that area, and you have to take certain classes. The woman has to take classes with the Rebbitzin, and learn all about Taharat HaMishpacha, the laws of family purity. And my friend Nava, it was just, she would hear the stories from her older sister who got married first. Her older sister, who was an MD, PhD, has to sit listening to this Rebbitzin talk about the menstrual cycle. And it's, I have no problems with talking about Taharat HaMishpacha, that's not an issue for me. Poor choice of words, but it is a, you have to go through this one particular perspective, and you have to realize that the rabbinate has turned away a great many secular Israelis because you don't have any secular options. You marry life cycle events are handled by religious communities, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, but they have their appointed representatives, and for Judaism, it's the rabbinate. So the rabbinate decides how you're going to do things. So a reform or conservative or secular Israeli couple, can't necessarily have the type of wedding they would like to have. It has to be, certain things have to be done by the rabbi.
Don't a lot of Israelis go out of country to get married too?
Yeah.
And come back?
Yeah, they go to Cyprus.
Yeah, right.
I was just going to mention that there's an ongoing excursion wedding business to Cyprus.
And it's so, first of all, there is that question, which, being liberal Jews, and here I'll put us in the liberal camp, I think we have problems with the rabbinate's control. And a number of my colleagues who had lived in Israel have written articles about, it's time to get rid of the rabbinate. And other people have written them as well, not just the Masorti or Reform Jews. So that is one issue. The second issue that is really very serious is the violence. It's the violence that is taken against people who are trying to pray. And it's not just in the main plaza, but it could even be on that other site. So for example, I think for Tisha B'Av, they had sent a number of Orthodox groups or Haredi groups, sent people to already set up prayer minyanim on the other side by Robinson's Arch, so there would be no room for the egalitarian services. And I think there's a very real concern about escalating violence. And this is a personal aside. I think that this has been a problem in Israel for a long time. There have been violent acts against Reform and conservative synagogues and conservative and Reform communities, but also you have an increasingly violent extreme right wing. The problems some of the ultra-nationalist settlers are causing in Israel, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of vandalism. There are a lot of attacks. There have even been attacks on Christian institutions. And I think that Israel has kind of stepped back for far too long in really clamping down on the ultra-right. Again, we're not talking about most Orthodox Jews in Israel. Even if you were to talk about settlers, they're, first of all, 70% of the settler communities are in the communities that are close to the West Bank, and some of them work very closely with their Arab neighbors, and they're not interested in any type of conflict. And but you have these ultra-right groups, which, thanks to Netanyahu, were brought into the government. Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of them. And, he has certainly been at the protests, and, that.
Do you see any change with the Bennett government to?
I thought we did, because, when the government made clear to us, to the Reform and conservative movements, and really starting when it came into power, they clearly were in favor of implementing this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what has been remarkable about this government is they've done a number of things for Israel. I think they're working hard at really trying to implement what could be done. And they have taken on, some of the ultra-Orthodox, because the ultra-Orthodox are not necessarily in the in the government.
After it's over, I'll send you the
That's
Sorry, I
fine.
don't know why I can't.
It's fine.
calls.
Yeah, I know that, but I normally I could
Mute them? Okay.
mute. I have to mute everybody because all of a sudden I lost my list.
He's there.
Okay, no, that's all right.
Uh,
We're fine. So I don't know, because the government already supports this agreement. This is a government that I think supports it much more than the Netanyahu government. This government has also shown itself much more interested in repairing relationships with the diaspora Jewry. But they're doing their own political calculus, and it's really frustrating. So
if you go all the way back in history for the Jewish state in 1947, when it was 1947, 48, when it became a state, the wall, access to the wall, anybody can go there.
Well,
Correct? Or was Jordan still?
no, but Jordan wouldn't allow it. So pre-47, there's no mechitza at the wall.
Right, okay.
People could just go and
right.
pray.
But it's very hard to get there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, now we have this huge plaza in front of the Kotel.
Right,
They used to be homes, and they
Right.
were all, within a few weeks, were removed.
Right.
Also, I have to say that pre-47, I don't know that there were a lot of egalitarian prayer groups.
Yeah, I don't think.
I think throughout Jewish history, it's not suddenly, women are running to daven and put on talis and tefillin at the wall. Certainly during the years at which Jordan controlled the old city of Jerusalem, we had no access. And then in 67 was when Israel set up a separate organization to run the Kotel. And that was when they made the decision that, this is how it's going to be done.
And it was done by the Orthodox community.
Well, yeah, the power was given to Orthodox authorities. And that also actually does go back to the formation of the state when Ben Gurion actually gave, religion, gave Judaism, into the hands of a rabbinate. Because, he was a good socialist. He didn't really think this religion stuff was going to last. And there weren't that many Haredim at that time.
Right.
And so, we're in a very different situation today. And, the reality is, I said before, that the majority of people that are at the Kotel every day are Orthodox. So that there would be an Orthodox prayer space at the Kotel is totally appropriate. What it is morphed into is the fact that there's no way of anyone else participating in the way they want to. So hence, conservative and reformed Jews, have not been able to daven in their way. And now, that, we have what one would think is a really good solution. They're on the other side of the wall. I mean, to some extent, it's the same wall, but, they're on the other side. They can do their own thing. But that people are being stirred up, like as Gary said, it's juvenile because they literally are stirring up young kids. It's not exactly the same, but I have to say that there are similarities because some of this is coming from the ultra-right. Just as the conflicts between Arabs and Jews were occurring over the summer in Israeli cities, some of that was really fomented by groups coming into the cities and creating the problems. They weren't necessarily the inhabitants of those cities. They were often people brought in, either by the Arabs or by the Jews.
Outside agitators.
Yeah,
I mean, it's almost you could see the parallel in the Muslim community with the ultra right who become terrorists, and you got to do it my way or no way.
Right.
But that's only a very small percentage of the Muslim community.
yeah, but they have quite,
worldwide.
yeah.
Yeah.
But we have that here too. It's in any group. Most of the Christians in this country are not necessarily, well, I don't know percentages, but certainly the what we used to call the religious right. Those very, you can't even say evangelical because there are different groups of evangelicals. It's hard to use these broad terms with whoever you're talking about. But you see some of the extremists within Christianity.
Sure. I mean, there's a great fictional book, but it's historical fiction. Dan Brown's book, Origin.
I haven't read Origin. I read one of his others, but
yeah, but that's a perfect example of the extremism in the Christian faith.
Yeah. Well, and how it seeps into it. Was it Mike Flynn who made the comment a couple months ago about, America should have one religion and, one faith, and, the Ruvain Hammer, Alav Shalom, my teacher and, past president of the Israeli Rabbinical Assembly and, lived in Israel for most of his life. And, he said that, it may have been Itamar Ben Gavir, one of these Kahanists, who basically said to them, we're going to, after we take care of the Arabs, we're going to come after you, meaning conservative and Reform Jews. So it's also, and the other issue that's very serious is, what are the relations between Israel and the diaspora? I mean, on one hand, Israel deals with stuff that we in the diaspora don't have to deal with. And that's the reality. And, I'm not, maybe we should have a voice in Israel, but we certainly shouldn't have a veto because we're not there. On the other hand, some of this stuff gets used as an excuse. Yes, Israel always has security problems, but that's not always what's distracting Israel from everything else going on in the country. And, to say that, in the States, you don't really understand. Yeah, I think a lot of that is true, but a lot of people in the States do in fact understand. And, it's not as if there's such an iron wall. I mean, look on this call. We have a couple people whose children live in Israel. And we have other people in the congregation whose children live in Israel, or siblings or relatives. And, I can speak to the many across of the congregations that I was in across the country who have children in Israel and friends and have a great deal invested in Israel. And what happens in Israel does affect many diaspora Jews very, very strongly. And, even in terms of the politics and security of Israel, with the phenomenon of worldwide terrorism and, different political groups in different countries, you can't say that what happens in Israel doesn't affect what happens elsewhere. It shouldn't, but, it does. And again, what does it mean to be a Jewish state? This is an ongoing issue that Israel has to struggle with. How much of the religious side of Judaism, I mean, that is at the core of Judaism. But how much of it, what perspectives should totally control the Jewish state? why do Jews feel disenfranchised from the Jewish state? And I'm not talking about, the extreme left. God knows we have problems with the anti-Zionist Jews. But I'm talking about for people who care about Israel and feel a commitment to Israel. Should we have to do our life cycle events behind closed doors? Should we have to put extra security around our synagogues in Israel? And it's I'm a little bit sadder about this because I understand why they want to freeze this whole discussion, because this government is hanging by a thread, and Likud is working very, very, very hard to disrupt it and bring it down. But it's sad because there are just so many Jews around the world and in Israel. It's also this perception that Israelis don't care. Now the reality is that most of them don't. They don't go to the Kotel. They're not concerned that they don't know anything about reform and conservative Jewry. They're not so concerned about how Americans feel when they come to Israel. And depending who's asking the question, you get different numbers. But it seems to me that, from some of the numbers I was looking at in these articles, you do have a majority of Israelis, only about 60-some% that want to have, freedom of worship at the Kotel and think this is an important issue. So, there are Israelis. First of all, there are Reform and conservative Jews that live in Israel. So, it's not an unimportant issue. It's not at the level of priority of the government in this, as the same way it might be for conservative Jewish leadership, Masorti Jewish leadership. But it's still an important issue, and how the relationship between Israel and the diaspora are, I would say, very important. But it's a tough one, and it's frightening because of the violence that's being allowed, or not being allowed. When there was the violence on Tisha B'Av was condemned by just about everybody. But when you have a certain attitude that we just kind of step back from some of the right-wing extremists, that just opens a very bad door. Any other comments, thoughts, questions?
Interesting topic.
Yes.
Yeah, and it touches on so many things. As I said, on one hand, there are issues that are much larger than ours. As much as I believe that the specific role of Masorti Judaism in Israel may not be the highest priority. On the other hand, it does have a lot to say about what is the relationship between Israel and the rest of the Jewish world, and again, what's going on within Israel itself. We want the state to have a Jewish character, but if the Jewish character is being only handled by Jewish characters, are we in a good shape? It's tough. It's tough. And I feel really torn because I really want to support this government. I think it's just incredible. And even if I don't think they're doing as much as they could, they've been doing a lot. I think they have done some things to turn down the temperature with the Palestinians. I think they're handling issues in Israel. And, it's also very sad that the Likud is jumping on this as a point to kind of bring down the government. That I think is disgraceful. So,
It's a tough issue. That's
yeah, it's a difficult issue. And, two Jews, three opinions, so, I mean,
I was going to say that earlier.
yeah, I mean, that's, the old joke about the meeting between Golda Meir and Johnson. And they meet, and Golda Meir, Johnson asked Golda Meir, so tell me, Prime Minister Meir, how are things in your country? So they're difficult. There are a lot of challenging issues. And Lyndon Johnson responds, yes, I understand there are a lot of issues, but you are a prime minister of 2 million people. I am the president of 200 million people. We have far more issues, far more problems. And she said, yes, Mr. President, you may be the president of 2 million people, but I am the prime minister of 2 million. You may be the president of 100 million, 200 million people, but I am the prime minister of 2 million prime ministers.
That was taken. Did you ever hear the recording of You Don't Have to Be Jewish?
Yes.
That comes from
Yes, that absolutely comes from that one. Yeah, I was so happy. I was in a used record store and I saw one. Yes, I've got, because I grew up with that. And so now I'm still waiting till I have enough to finish refurbishing my system, and I can.
Got a turntable now. But my grandson Moshe loves that album. He keeps on his MP3 player.
It is hysterical. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone. Reminder, of course, noon tomorrow, assuming the computer works. We will have our study in Parashat HaShavua. And again, everything is online this Shabbat. We're not yet returning to in-person, but we'll have a discussion during services on Saturday. I have to say, as someone who cannot, as you all know, I cannot stand Zoom services. Hate it. But I've really enjoyed the discussions. I like hearing from everybody. It's great. Okay, have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.
Good day.
Bye.